Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Mother Tree Network podcast, where we are being joined today by our special guest. I'm so excited to talk with her, Jen Frey, who's written a new book on how to communicate with plants, one of my favorite subjects. And so, what we're going to do in this interview is I'm going to start off by asking lots of questions and getting Jen to tell us all kinds of stories. And then, probably about midway through, I'm going to be joined by some members of the Mother Tree community who are also way, way, way deep into plants and communicating with plants to, hear a couple of other voices and perspectives. So, Jen, we'd like to start off every phone call or podcast episode with the question, what is good? So, what's good for you today?
The sun is shining. The weather this week has been, I want to say perfect, but at the same time, we also need some rain. So it can't be like this every day, but it's like the perfect day, perfect temp, sun shining. The plants are growing. The plants are in abundance right now. It's great to be in the garden and connect with the plants. I had a robin come down and rob a strawberry this morning while I was out there, and so we had some conversation. So that's all good.
Well, okay, so there are two threads I have to follow up with because one
Yeah.
is about the robin coming to rob the strawberry, and the other one is wait, you talk about your garden. So tell us, I know you're the author of this book, How to Communicate with Plants, but you also have your own gardens or situation. Tell us a little bit about what you have, what you're growing, what's going on over there, and
Yeah. Yeah. So we live on what I call Heart Springs Sanctuary. So it is 4.5 acres. We have three ponds and a creek that runs through it. So a lot of one of our ponds is I think originally this area was probably wetlands. So we're trying to work on helping that restore. So I always I always get nervous when people want to say they want to come see my gardens, because my gardens aren't like, they're not longwood gardens. They're not like what somebody's going to think that a plant lover's gardens would look like. I'm not meticulous. I'm not like, um, I don't design. I mean, I design for beauty, but I design with the nature spirit. So they inform me of what plants they want to grow where, and that's what we plant. And when I say my gardens, actually during COVID, we started growing vegetables. For years, I had grown vegetables a long time ago, and then I had stopped because where we live, we're surrounded by so many great organic farmers, and I thought, why not just support them? And I'll put my time into growing things for the birds, for the other beings of nature, and also just restoring the land. So that's what I did, as well as, I have students that come here, so I have to grow some plants that we work with in our classes. So I was growing those as well. But during COVID, when everything shut down, we're like, you know what? Maybe we should grow some of our own food. So we put in, it's grown. We have three raised beds. They're a little bit bigger than that, but we grow a small amount of our food. But it's actually a small amount, but in the height of summer, it feels like a really large amount that we can't keep up with it. So that's what I'm growing. And I forget all of your questions, Amanda. So I may have lost a thread there. So please come back
yeah,
in.
thank you. Thank you. That does give me a picture. I just want to get a picture of what your quote operation was. You know what I mean? I want to
Right.
physically locate you. If you feel comfortable telling us where you are situated on the
Yeah.
planet, it might be helpful to hear that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm in Washington Borough, which hardly anybody is going to know, even from Lancaster County. So we're in Lancaster County. We're 2 miles from the Susquehanna River. So I can see the river is like right down the road from me. And I'm in obviously the Susquehanna River water basin. And at one point, this was where, oh my gosh, my mind so the
Is this
Susquehanna.
Lenape? It's the Susquehanna people.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Susquehannock and then later Conostogans. These are colonist names for these people. We don't actually know what they called themselves, but apparently, just down the road from me is actually the place where they found the largest amount of artifacts of the Susquehannock people. I didn't know that. I thought it was somewhere else in the same town.
Mhm.
Um, but that's where it is. And I didn't know it when I came here, but it's also, I have ancestors that lived here a couple generations ago. It would be my grandfather's grandparents, I believe.
Mhm.
So I found that really interesting because that family never wanted to share their ancestry. And here I ended up, I felt this call. We looked for land for 3 years. I've been living here for 6 years now. And we were looking for the right place. And I drove past it and I saw the ponds and was like, if the ponds are on this place, I want it. And I got out and I stepped one foot on the land and was just like, this is the place. And so it had really great energy when we moved here. I work with hope this isn't too much for anybody, but I work with fairies. And so the fairy energy was really strong here. And then from our experience, we've also just been doing a lot of healing of the land because there's farmland around here, and we are the two major farms. The water comes right onto our property and was immediately going into the stream that eventually goes into the Conestoga River. And so we've been doing a lot of restoration work to try to mitigate all the chemicals coming in and helping the land repair.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So beautiful. And thank you. Thank you for being so willing to share with us. I'm just happy to say that you might be my first Lancaster County co-resident guest. Everybody else is from so far away. And here you were all this time. I was going through all this stuff during the pandemic. I had no idea who you were. So beautiful. And I want to you were talking about the Susquehanna people and how you're very close to what was like a major population. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge um, those ancestors, those people who caretook this land that you are so fortunate to be partnering with right now. And I'm so fortunate to be partnering with right now as well. So just say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for welcoming us and holding us. Hmm. And then, of course, you mentioned nature spirits as like co-creating with nature spirits. And so I wonder how, for people who who need a little bit of a handle as to like how you get there, can you tell us something about how you got to being able to feel or experience nature spirits? Maybe an origin story, perhaps, or if there's something more recent that will help us to know what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think so you mentioned my book, Communicating with Plants, and I wrote a book about communicating with plants because, as far as I'm concerned, working with the plants is like one of the easiest inroads to communicating with all of nature. So so in my life, I actually do communicate with all of nature, but in my teaching, we focus a lot more on plants. In some more advanced courses, we go deeper into other beings, but plants are just so generous and they're stationary. So and we have this really deep ancestral bond between us that our lives literally depend on them. And so they make it really easy. They also like recognize their role as trying to help humans to remember who we are and help us help come back into this fold of nature. So they generally want to communicate with people. They're excited to do it. So that's why we start with plants. Um, so as far as my own origin story, that's hard. I don't know that I really can say because what I know now is that even as a young child, I was communicating with fairies and having these experiences with fairies, but it wasn't something that was talked about in my family. So I didn't even have that word for it. I mean, of course I knew fairy tales and of course I saw Disney movies, but they were all make believe. It wasn't something that was real. And so I was having these experiences, like things showing up in my bedroom, like gifts would show up in my bedroom that nobody could like say, yes, I gave this to you, or like it just didn't come anywhere. And then as an adult, I started realizing like, oh, as I started going into my magical trading, it was just like, oh, that's fairies. Like that's what that was. And so now we have that experience. And I think one of the things that I would say is if this all feels too much for you, then just when you're in nature, like if you're walking along in nature and then you just suddenly feel like an upliftment or joy, or like, I mean, you can feel like you're in the presence of magic, or like sometimes the air even gets a little, there's a little glimmer in the air. That's a sign that you're in a place that has high nature spirits, and it feels good. It feels good to be there. Um, so that's what I think in general, most people actually have these experiences, just like I was saying, but we don't have words for it. We don't have understanding for it. And then when we start to, so even when we talk about communicating with plants, people get this image in their head of like what it's supposed to be like. It's supposed to be like Moses's burning bush, yelling at you and just being like very clear, like, hey, you need to go like gather these berries today, or you need to go turn off the stove, and that can happen, but it doesn't happen very often, and usually not like your first experience. Like, it's just kind of smaller.
Yeah. I love what you said. I'm going to stop repeating that because I think I'm going to love everything you say. But I want to get to this thing about an ancestral bond. And,
Mm,
and the way I want to introduce this is by saying that a lot of us 21st century industrialized people
mhm,
um, feel lonely or
mhm,
disconnected. And one of the reasons I feel for that is because of a loss of ancestor bonds.
mhm,
But you said that we have an ancestral bond with plants.
mhm.
So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, plants are our ancestors. They've been on this planet long before us. As I said, we have such a strong connection to them, and plants have always evolved before their animal counterparts. So they evolve, and then that allows us to evolve, and that allowed humans to come into creation, and it also is continuing to happen. So when we think about evolution, most people think of like Charles Darwin as this was it something that happened in the past a long time ago, or it takes a really, really, really long time before we see evolution. But evolution's happening every single day of our lives, and we can see it now that it's like things have sped up so fast, so it's just happening. And as we're learning um how to live in this time of great earth changes, we can go back to the plants because they've lived through those earth changes for so long. And then when you talk about like the loneliness and the separation and that ancestral disconnect, we can, tap into the plants, and it doesn't even have to be the plants from where our ancestors originated from, because, we're all on Earth. So it's the plants where we are still are connected to all of the plants all around. So what they're doing is they're just helping us to remember that we are nature. We are a part of this great system. We're not separate from it. We are an equal part, as are the ants, or I mentioned the robin, and I just want to apologize because I actually told the robin he could have a whole strawberry, just leave some, so he didn't really steal it from me. I just was saying that, so I'm sorry about that. But getting back to the ancestral, so that's what the plants are doing, is that they're helping us to reconnect with the earth that's on like it's under our feet here, and helping us to remember how to live on this spot of earth. And with that, then, we all have ancestors who once upon a time lived connected to nature. Some of them we may know, some of them we have to go back many, many, many generations before we can reach those ancestors who lived connected to nature, but they're there. And so that means that in our very DNA, we have those memories. We just have to awaken them. And that's what the plants in front of us is doing, is helping us to awaken those ancestral memories, and memories of being connected to nature.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about working with. You said that you are working to restore the land, for example.
Mhm,
You've used the word restore a couple of times.
mhm,
And this is like a very important concept for me because I'm thinking about how do we do regenerative racial justice. And so for
mhm,
me, part of it is restoration, is to
mhm,
restore ourselves.
mm,
Um, and I love how you're saying restore land. Tell me about what you
mhm.
mean when you say restore land.
Yeah. So So one that's like such a big category, right? So I'm just going to talk about my specific area right here. So this land that we live on, like I said, it was once, we're pretty sure it was once wetlands, and it was definitely forest. Like, most of Pennsylvania was forest, right? And then prior to our house was built in the 80s. So prior to that, this was farmland. So that means the trees got cut, the lands got drained, and it was farmed, right? So where I live on a little corner, and across the street on two sides are farms, and they're huge farms. And and so for people who don't live around farmland, I think you might not understand this, but when we talk about farming nowadays, it's so different than what at least what I think in my head, or what I grew up with a grandfather who grew his own food. It's they literally drive tractor trailers on the farmland constantly. And these, put lots of chemicals on, they put lots of fertilizers, which is also chemicals, and contain, lots of antibiotics and medicines from their animals on there. So because they drive over it so much, the ground becomes harder than cement. And so I can watch when it rains here, like, because one part of our property is a drainage culvert. And so and it comes off of the one farm, and I could watch when it rains, it actually pours off of the farmland more than if I go down the street to the church parking lot. It can't soak into the ground because the topsoil has been removed, the ground's so hard it can't. So where I'm living, because it hasn't been farmed for like 40 years, and because we're at this place where all of their topsoil was coming, the soil's actually really soft. So it's really it was quite sweet when I came here to plant things. Very different than when I used to live on another farm. But again, here it's that the land still wasn't able to utilize this water. So we're trying to work. It became obvious to me my second year here. My first year, we just kind of observed, and that drainage culvert, there was never water in it. The second year, in April, that was 2018, we had such a huge amount of rain, and we had massive flooding. And from April of 2018 to February of 2019, that drainage culvert was never dry. It was always wet. And it would go right from there directly into the stream. And I feel like I'm getting I'm saying too much here. So I just want to shorten it a little bit and say, when I moved to the property, as I said, there's this wetlands area, and that's what I wanted to work on. I wanted to like help the wetlands recover. But the nature spirits were very clear in pointing to this other area and saying, this is what I need to do. And I didn't know what that was. And as I started clearing where they told me to clear, I discovered that it was the dump on this land. So it was once, I think, a burn pile, but the husband was very sick for quite a while. And so I think things just accumulated there. And so it took us about a year to get all the trash out of here. And we did. And then what I saw was that there was just this natural concave. And that was where the drainage ditch flows into there and out. So it wasn't the first weekend that we had flooding, but like maybe the second or third. And I was like, okay, something has to be done with this water. I was teaching somewhere, and I went to teach, and they totally changed the schedule up. So it turned out that now I had time to go to this class before me, and the class was on rain gardens. And like that day, I was like, I don't know what to do. What am I supposed to do here? And here's like, oh, okay, I'm supposed to put a rain garden in here. And so that's one of our forms of restoration here. And it's been the biggest project here, that it's been in different stages. I mean, it's actually a really huge area. And if I showed it to you, you wouldn't think it's a rain garden. You wouldn't think there was anything going on there, but it was very intentional of, again, slowing down the water, but also putting plants in there that help change the vibration, so that those water molecules that are coming through all the poisons, when they hit here, they get changed so that by the time they get to the stream, they're not holding that same vibration anymore.
Wow. Okay. Because I asked you about the principle of restoration, and you said you were going to get specific with your land, and you told us, you said you watched. Your first step was just to watch, and
Right,
then you listen to these nature spirits and like do this focus on this area. So you cleared out the trash,
right.
and then you put in a rain garden so that it could absorb the water, but also shift the vibration of it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, you want to say something more?
I do. I just want to say, because I missed a real key part there, was that there was resistance too. And I just have to own that because this area was so big and it wasn't something that I knew what to do for. And so I was just like, it's too much for me. Like I know what they want, but I don't really know how to make that happen. And so there's this plant, Japanese hops, that's considered to be an invasive. And it started growing on our property the second year. It wasn't here at all the first year. And then by this third year that I'm still not putting in the rain garden, but I know what has to happen, it completely took over that whole area. And when I finally sat down with this hops that had been asking for my attention and I was ignoring because I was too busy, and then starts grabbing my students' attention saying, hey, we need to talk to her. Then when I finally sat down, they showed me what needed to happen. And in the end, Japanese hops actually smothered all the other plants there. So all we had to do was clear the hops out of there, which was really just like rolling up a mat. And so I think I'm saying this to say that part of when I say with, it's really with, and it's letting go of mostly letting go of our own beliefs of what has to happen and listening. But it also is helpful to bring in, especially once we get more comfortable with it, bring in our own knowledge. Or like, sometimes I think this is particularly potent with restoration. Sometimes the nature spirits don't understand the limits of our bodies, or that we need to sleep, or we need, we need whatever. Or sometimes it's even we need money. Like, hey, like I'm happy to do this, but that's thousands of dollars of work. So tell me how I can do this in a manner that doesn't bankrupt me. And so we have to let them know of our own information, and then we can together, which that's always the key, right? Is like we all bring in our expertise, and then together we create a better vision. So that was the part I wanted to add in there.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. I want to talk about, the hops talking to your student and, then you talking to the nature spirits. And you and the robin earlier. Because I just want to affirm something happened to me.
Mm,
Um, we put some plants in, I believe it was kale and something else. And
mhm,
and the rabbits like ate it immediately in my garden, right? And
mhm,
I told my friend Amy, who's on this call and who we will invite into the conversation soon. I was like, what do I do? Because I know she grows food, And she's like, well, you could put up a fence and you might want to talk to the rabbits.
mhm,
And I was like, I don't want to put up that ugly fence. And a little embarrassed, it never occurred to me to talk to the rabbits.
mhm,
So, because I know people around me don't think that that's a thing. So I did talk to the rabbits.
mhm,
Like I prayed, and I was just saying, please, you've had a lot. I would like to have some of these crops. I would love to have some of these veggies this year. Can you please eat other places?
mhm,
And I am not lying. I put in more things and they have not eaten them. And I put things in different containers and they didn't eat those. And so I'm just amening and confirming, wow, community, I mean, it did happen,
mhm,
and so I'm really grateful. So thank you for talking about that and saying how you talk with the robins about sharing the strawberries
mhm,
um and we never think that that's not never. Some of us don't even remember that's an option.
mhm,
So that's beautiful. Um Regenerate. Tell me
mhm,
about how you look at regeneration, like somehow, and I'll just say for me, I'm thinking about regeneration somehow creating holistic cycles so things feed on each other in a harmonious way, so
mhm,
nobody's depleted.
mhm. Yeah, I think it's interesting that you gave me that question because my partner, this is actually his work. He talks about using regenerative frameworks, and he's in the green building industry. And so he leads workshops to help with that. And then he also is working with a nonprofit that they're regenerative farmers. So regenerative is like this big word he uses all the time, and I never use it. So I think it's just interesting. But in my head, and I think part of the reasons why I don't is that I don't use it is because one, it feels like it's taking on that key phrase, like sustainability. It's like becoming the it word. Like we tend to find a word and that becomes the word that gets used for everything. So I've seen regenerative used. I can't think of examples right now, but I've seen it used in really suspect ways. So, but also so while I'm not asking it in myself, what I'm thinking constantly is, yeah, what you're saying about this system of creating something that is supportive of all, and not overly taxing anyone, and by anyone being all of nature, not just people. And so that's what I do try to think on here. We can use the word permaculture as one that's often used for growing food, and I think there are some aspects of permaculture that are really great, and some I've struggled with, and but at the end, it's just going back to nature, because that's nature's system of um, we live in we like to think that we don't live in a closed system, but we completely live in a closed system. We're all here, even though like we're trying to send rockets out into space all the time. We're really still in this gorgeous, incredible planet that has provided everything we could possibly need, and we don't even know what all is here. And I'm not talking like we can't discover more species. Like, yeah, there's more species to be discovered, but also working with energy, like there's so much possibility that's beyond what we can think of. And so that's, I think, what I'm holding with regenerative, is that I don't I don't live in a healthy system. We don't live in a healthy culture. So it's like it's stretching my mind a little bit to try to shift that and think, what does it actually look like? And I still have a question mark.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, Me too. Me too. And maybe that is the way to approach it, is like I'm learning, and keep absorbing. And I just loved how you learned from the land and
Right.
still are learning. And
Oh, for sure.
and also use this, you talked about evolution. You said it's not
Mhm,
this thing that just happens over extremely long periods of time. It's happening
mhm,
every day.
mhm.
I love that shift in the framework. We're going to take a little break now and hear a word from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back and have joining our conversation some people from the Mother Tree community. So we're back with our special guest, Jen Frey, who's written this book called Communicating with Plants. And it's been a fabulous conversation so far. And my joy is to get to weave into it two of my friends from the Mother Tree Network, Amy Keatsman and Kirsten Bull, who both have exciting relationships with plants and nature spirits and all kinds of stuff. So, Kirsten, why don't you start us off? Do you have a question, or what's going on for you hearing Jen talk?
Sure. I was reminded of the time that I've been spending in the yard at the land where I live, and I appreciated how you described kind of the length of time that you allowed yourself, or that it required to listen and respond. I sort of have fallen into that backwards here. And for me, it's often very micro, like, oh, pull this little bit, leave that little plant. And I'm doing it all intuitively. I have no idea what I'm doing. So but hearing you speak, I'm reaffirmed in the sense that there is, that guidance is a real thing, and that I'm not supposed to know everything right up front. So that is immensely reassuring. So thank you for that.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know how you could possibly know everything up front. So.
It's an illusion.
But that is like, that's one of the things that we always think, right? I think particularly as Americans, and that's that individualism, right? That we all have to know it all. We all have to do it ourselves. We have to be experts in everything. And part of that is also that humans know better than nature. And so it's like having to relearn that we don't actually know better than nature. In this case, we're talking about plants, but the other beings of nature know much more than we do how to be in community with one another, and how to be supportive of one another. And they're trying to like remind us of that. And so I think that's, when it comes to learning how to communicate with plants or communicating with nature, I think one of the biggest steps is just that humility that it takes to like, I mean, it's being humble that we don't know it all, but at the same time, that just takes so much pressure off of us. It's just like, it just allows us to like relax and open up and realize that we're not, the weight of the world is not actually on our shoulders. We're not responsible for everything. We can only do, like you said, the micro. Like sometimes it is just really what's right in front of you right now. And sometimes that's the most important. Like, I mean, I said I have 4.5 acres I'm working with here, but you know, it could just be a patio out back or like a couple pots on a windowsill or something. And if we just work with them and really listen to what's needed there, then that's powerful and that's potent and that brings huge change. That it doesn't have to be huge.
And
Wow.
it, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kirsten.
I'm bordered by other people's regular lawns on every side, and it's about half an acre here. And so there are different dialogues, and I'm 7 years in here, is that right? And it's taken that long to just get the boundary on one side. It took about 3 years on the other side because it's not obvious. But what is obvious when other people is that, well, it looks like she's not doing anything over there, so I should help her out and just mow this. So, but it has to be done in a spirit of, kind of right relationship too. And that has, there's even more humility there. So lots of layers. But yeah, we just this week got I finally put a little bit of thread, just a little bit of thread, and it was enough. It was enough. So anyway, thank you. Yeah.
So I have the same thing here. I mean, I said I have these 2 farms, but we have another neighbor on the one side that it is just total lawn. I mean, he also has multiple acres and it's all lawn and it's very cleanly mowed. And everybody's like, well, where am I gonna, like, when they come here to look for plants, like, well, how will I know when I hit the boundary? But like, oh, don't worry, you'll know. Like, there's no confusing it. But what I'm a fan of is, well, mine are from United Plant Savers. I'm a member of United Plant Savers, and this land is part of their botanical sanctuary network. So with them, we get signs. So they're posted that says that this is a sanctuary, that we're growing medicinal plants here, medicinal and rare endangered plants here. And so please don't harvest anything. Please don't trespass. Please don't spray anything. But there are many other signs all around that are available now about recognizing that it's a sanctuary, and I think that's so helpful, and it helps people know. Like, I mean, a good portion of our land we normally mow paths through. We let most of it wild, but right now, like probably 3/4 of it, we haven't done our first mow for the year yet, so it's really wild. So it just lets people know that yes, we are here and we are taking care of it. We understand that it might not look that way to you, but it's just a different way. So yeah, signs I think are helpful. And these are not like, they're not horrible, like, oh, you suck because you spray poisons. Because like you said, it is about human relations. And if we go at our neighbors so negatively, then it also defeats the purpose, because then you become like those nutty environmentalists who just hate everybody, rather than like, this is another way of being with the land.
Thich Nhat Hanh was asked a question about how do we save the planet? And he said, we got to save the environmentalists first. So thank you for saying that. And Amy Keatsman, my friend and fellow plant sister, what's happening for you with this conversation? You are muted, by the way.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that happened to me is it's a similar time frame. We've been on this property this is our 8th year, and but it's huge, and so I think that's been part of it's 20 acres and 10 acres of woodland and 10 acres of former pasture. Some of it's yard, and I not only have issues with my neighbors, I have issues with my husband. So it's been but the question or the area that I'm interested in is, it took me, it became clear that I was in an intense apprenticeship to the land. But I think for the longest time, I wish I'd had your book, but also for the longest time, I was expecting to hear words back from the land and from plants. And And mostly that's not what I hear. I mean, sometimes I get a really strong no, but it's a no feeling. It's not the word. And sometimes words come, like one time I was as part of a forest bathing experience that I was doing, I just felt the urge to sing. So I was singing to the forest, and then it was almost like images came, and what that kind of resolved into, I was the forest was telling me it was missing the large animals, the bison that used to be here, and the wolves and the mountain lions, and then following that was, oh, so humans are the top predators now, and so what does that mean? And I've really been trying to, figure out what that means. But anyway, it would be interesting. I mean, you have used words in what you said the plants are telling you, and so maybe you do get words, but are there other ways that you experience the communication?
And before you
Yeah.
answer that, Jen, I want you to
Oh.
tell us all the correct name of your book, because I feel like I've said
Oh,
it a
yeah.
couple different ways.
Yeah. It's Communicating with Plants, Heart-Based Practices for Connecting with Plant Spirits.
Okay. So let us know how to do that.
Yeah. So Amy, that's a great question. And it's one that commonly comes up when we start talking about plant communication, because yeah, like I said, everybody thinks about Moses and the burning bush. And so one of the things that we're doing in whether it's with the book, so in the book there's 17 different activities that you are invited to do with your plant being that you're working with. And we do similar things. I teach weekend long classes, and we do similar things with them in my classes. And so one of the reasons why we're having all these experiences is to see the different ways in which the plants can communicate with us. And in that is not only the different ways that they can communicate, but also what are the ways in which we receive information.
Right.
So like when I always take it back to communicating with humans. And so when we have these communications with humans, conversations with humans, we're receiving information in so many different ways. And we each do it differently, so like I'm a pretty kinesthetic person, so I sense things. And my partner, I'm like, you're not sensing this? He's like, no. I'm like, well, so so it's also like, what's our skill set? And it's just about training in and honing into how it is that we receive them. So just to answer, like, how is it for me? I do get feelings in my body. I do hear words. I don't hear them like I can hear your voice. I hear them in my head. And it's usually using different language or different tones than what I use myself. And I also see images a lot. So like particularly with when I was talking about the rain garden, I would see an image of what it's supposed to look like. Or sometimes I'll see an image of a plant and I don't even know who that plant is, but I have to go find the plant to like, okay. And that's always interesting, because then they come into my life in really bizarre ways. And it's just like, oh, now I know who you were. Thank you very much. So there's so many different ways, like I have one student who gets songs every time she connects with, she can sing your song, everywhere she goes, she sings songs. And another student that she brings in poems when she's sitting with the plants. But it's just like, there's no, one of the foundations that I'm trying to get across with this work, and that the plants are like hitting me like with just huge, not even 2x4s on top of my head, is that we just got to get rid of this idea of a hierarchy or like better
Right.
than. So there's no better way to communicate. Like there's no best way to communicate with plants. It's however you receive that information, so that you know what it is and you know what that means. And to be fair, sometimes we receive the communication and it can take us even years to understand what that meant, but then like we get it. And it's not, fortunately, that's not all the time that happens, but sometimes it is. And then we understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm particularly dense in certain ways. But, one of the people that I've depended on has advised me to, when I feel like, I've gotten a communication that I understand, then to also ask, did I get it right? To ask again, because that's the other thing that we humans do is, we think we know.
Mhm.
And that's certainly true in, translation. But I was really happy to hear you say that each of us is different, because I love languages. And early on somewhere, I just got the sense that actually we're always translating, even if we're speaking in the same language. Like that there's just this translation that needs to go on all the time. So
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. And for our listeners out there, um, I want to alert you to Amy. Speaking of translation, we're always translating. Amy is a short story writer. And I feel like your stories seem to figure people who are on the boundaries of worlds translating between seen and unseen. And
mhm.
yeah, so beautiful. So I brought that up because I hope that somehow I'll link to something in the show notes so you can experience some of Amy's work. So we're coming toward the end of our time, Jen Frey, and we'll just have to do something longer together in the future. But I want to give you a quote from your book and actually have you share with us why you think this way, because I thought this was a very hopeful statement, and I want to hear why you think this way. So you say in your book, plants can help us to discover solutions to any problem or question, including big collective issues such as climate change, social injustice, energy alternatives, poverty, agriculture, diseases, anything that keeps us from thriving. So tell us why you think that plants can help us to discover solutions to those kinds of things too.
Well, my answer is because they can. But I just want to say there's an expansion to that quote, and that is why I feel that everybody needs to learn how to communicate with plants. Because in general, in my classes, I've been teaching plant communication for about 15 years, and the majority of the people that come to my classes are plant lovers or herbalists or healers. And last year, I had the privilege of teaching a class to mostly green building people, and they were all professionals, and very few people in that class were actually plant lovers, or that wasn't their world. And it was so important to see that how their experiences with it, how they just took it, but also that really gave me that feeling. I've known that plants can give us those answers, but I saw it here in a very practical way, like, oh, so if they were going to communicate with plants as they're designing a building, then how would that building be different? And so I think it's important that everybody learns this, because whatever area of expertise we have, the plants connect with us exactly where we are. So when we bring our expertise, when we bring ourselves there, we include our wounds, we include our, the traumas that we are carrying. And so the plants give us the message that we need at that time. And that's one of the beauties of why we can continue to communicate with the same plant our whole life, because, we're changing and we're healing. And so then the plants can give us the message that we need for there. And so we need everybody who has their own expertise, because if I go communicate with a plant and they're giving me information about like alternative energy sources, it's going to go right over my head because I have no context for it. So most of the time, most of the messages I get are about healing and helping people to, heal and recover and restore to their wholeness, as well as answers for the problems in my life. But that's because that's the context that I need and that I can understand. So yeah, everyone.
Oh, wow. I love that nuance. So not only might people get different messages, but the context that you bring to it allows you to absorb and sort of work with whatever it is that you get.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, I want to thank you, Jen Frey, for being our guest today, for sharing your book, Communicating with Plants, with us, and your stories. And I want to thank, of course, Amy and Kirsten from the Mother Tree Network community for sharing their stories. And if you want to know more about Jen, how can they connect with you, Jen?
Oh, yeah. So my website's bridgetsway.com. And there's lots of ways to connect with me on there. So check me out.
And how do they get your book?
You can order it from me now and my publisher, Inner Traditions. And then on June 13th is when it'll be released to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, hopefully your local independent bookstore, and yeah, wherever you get books.
And this came to me, and so I'm going to say it out loud. I am going to host a monthly book group this summer. So one in June, one in July, one in August. And we are definitely going to make your book one of the books.
Great.
So yes. So stay tuned, everybody, for that. But I'll also put whatever links Jen gives me into the show notes. And stay in touch. Let us know about any communications that you have with plants, what they tell you about any big social issues or concerns that you have. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you.